everyone and welcome back to our channel. My name's Beth. If you're interested in anything to do with renovations, property and investment, then please subscribe to our channel, like our videos. It really helps support us here on YouTube. We're also on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. The username for that is @Rossington Homes, so you should be able to find us quite straightforward. It's the same as what our name is on YouTube. So today's video is about HMO, so houses in multiple occupancy or houses of multiple occupation. There's a few different names for it, but it all means the same thing. Now, a property which has 3 or 4 tenants is usually known as a multi-let property, whereas if it has 5 or more, then this is considered to be a large HMO and you will need a licence to run your property in this way. You might be watching this video as a tenant, so wanting to know a little bit more about the property you're living in, how it's run. HMOs are often referred to as house shares. So if you're living with other people, maybe strangers, things like spareroom.com, those kind of properties, then it's most likely what you're living in is an HMO, if there's more than sort of 4 or 5 of you. So this video is really directed at investors, those considering either buying an HMO property or considering converting a property to be an HMO let. Now, HMOs can be really profitable in terms of your return on your investment compared to if you're renting to, say, a family rather than 4 or 5 individuals. Houses which have got 3 or 4 tenants are generally considered to be a multi-let property, but you might still need a licence in order to run it in this way. However, a property of 5 or more tenants from a different household, so more than one family, that's going to need a licence for you to do this. So if you want to check which licence you need or how to get this, you need to speak to your local council and they can advise you on whether your specific property and the way you're intending on letting it is going to require an HMO licence. Even if you're really experienced in letting HMO properties, it's always sensible to have somebody manage this for you, especially if you're considering building a portfolio of properties and you're going to be having multiple tenants in multiple different sites. There's quite a lot of guidelines and requirements that need to be met if you're running an HMO. So having someone experienced manage this for you is really beneficial. So you can find somebody, have a look online, look at different reviews, but also go around local estate agents and ask them if they manage HMOs, how many they manage and what experience they have in doing this. So when it comes to actually choosing a house to let as an HMO property, it's really important that as a landlord, you're meeting all of your obligations and requirements, not only ethically, but also by law. The first major requirement, as I've already sort of mentioned, is the licence. So your licence will last a maximum of 5 years and you need this licence per HMO property which you're planning to let. On average they cost between £500 and £1,200, this will vary, but it's really important that this is arranged prior to starting letting your property. Rules for HMO licensing were changed in October 2018, so it's really important when you're investing in property, working in the property industry, that you are keeping a close eye on legislation, rules, guidance, because it is constantly changing, so you don't want to be caught out. This is another advantage of working with a management company or a letting agent, because they can advise you on this sort of thing as you go along and also as you gain experience and make more contacts. So within 5 years, the local authority will visit your property and carry out a housing health and safety rating system risk assessment. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but this is going to be done within the first 5 years of you starting to let the property as an HMO. This allows them to identify any issues there may be with the property in order for you to address them and get it sorted out promptly. Now, the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act is one which outlines the minimum floor space required for sleeping accommodation. So the amount of floor space required is different depending on the number of people sleeping in the room and their age. So there's mainly 3 different categories. There's under 10 years of age, then there's 1 person over 10 years of age, and then there's 2 people over 10 years of age. So there's a minimum floor space which you need to abide by depending on how many people are going to be sleeping in that room. You have to notify the local housing authority of any bedrooms which are less than 50 square feet, so 49.9 square feet or below, and this can't be used as sleeping accommodation. Now, anything more than that, but under 70 square feet, can be used for those under the age of 10 as sleeping accommodation, but it can't be used by anyone over the age of 10 as sleeping accommodation. The room has to be a minimum of 70.1 square feet in order for someone over the age of 10 to sleep in it. For 2 people to sleep in it, it has to be over 110 square feet. So this is something to consider if you're planning on having couple sharing rooms, if you want to sort of maximise the number of people staying within your property, or if you're having children there as well. You really need to understand the minimum floor space in order for it to be used as sleeping accommodation to be complying with the law. The Regulatory Fire Reform Order 2005 sets out specific fire safety regulations. Now, it's really important that you have a fire risk assessment or a fire safety risk assessment carried out and regularly reviewed, and this is stated in the order, so you have to do this, it's non-negotiable. You need to log all the fire alarm tests, carbon monoxide tests, so these need to be recorded in writing when they've been tested, and your risk assessment has to be also kept up to date. There also has to be fire doors on all of the bedroom doors, and there need to be 2 fire doors on the kitchen, so a way in and a way out in any HMO. So the final act which we need to discuss is the Deregulation Act. So I'm going to come on to that in a little bit more detail shortly, so I'll sort of come back to it. But there are certain things which are prescribed by the Deregulation Act that you have to do. Number one, for safety and to be compliant, but also if you don't follow these rules, then it means you can't evict a tenant under Section 21. So it's really important that you follow these, not only to make sure the tenants are safe and for your own sort of conscience, but also to protect you as a landlord. So you need to get a gas safety certificate, and you need to have the gas safety check done every year by a gas safe registered engineer. So this is an annual thing, and you also need to give the updated certificate to your tenants within 28 days. Otherwise, you can't evict them under Section 21 and you're in breach of your side of the deal. You also need electrical appliance safety test certificates, so usually these will last for 5 years. You don't have to keep these on the property, but you do need to be able to present them when asked, so it's always worth having a copy in the property and one for your own records. And you need an EICR, which is an electrical installation condition report. Again, you can put a copy of this in the tenant documents, but also keep one for yourself. This all needs to be sort of available and presentable if you're asked for it at any point. So that basically covers the legislation and also the testing that you need to get done prior to having tenants live in the property. So now we'll move on to the documentation, which is sensible to give the tenants, and also the legally required documentation which you need to give the tenants, and I'll chat to you a little bit about when you need to give it to them. The one thing which is mandatory that it's in a prominent place in the property is the manager's contact details. So everything else can go in a folder, it can be put somewhere else in the property, but the manager's contact details have to be visible to all the tenants. So in a communal area, usually maybe a laminated piece of paper or a picture or printed on a wall somewhere. So there are 4 things which are the prescribed information in the Deregulation Act which need to be sort of in your tenant's document. So these 4 things all need to be there, they all need to be available for your tenants, and again, they're not negotiable. All of these things need to be given to the tenant before they accept the tenancy. So you can't give them retrospectively, they have to have seen these before moving into the property. It's definitely sensible to get in writing and confirm that the tenant has received these prior to taking the tenancy, because otherwise you can't really prove that they did see it, and then they could argue that you are in breach of your duties as a landlord. So 3 of the things which need to be included here are the EPC, which is the Energy Performance Certificate. You can find this for most properties just by searching for it. So if it's been done, you should be able to access it. The How to Rent Handbook, which is by the government. So again, you can get this online, print out a copy, and you can attach it as a PDF to emails that you send to your tenants before they accept the tenancy. And finally is the Gas Safety Certificate. So you also need to send that to the tenants before they accept the tenancy. Another thing which is a slightly bigger topic than what we would cover in this video, but it is really important, is the deposit. So when you take a deposit from a tenant, it has to be registered, so with the DPI, so like a tenancy deposit scheme, and it needs to be done within 30 days of receiving the deposit, and the tenant has to sign for it. So it's really important that everything to do with your deposit is done properly, because otherwise you may find that you aren't entitled to keep it at the end of the tenancy, even if they've destroyed the house. So it's really important that things to do with your deposit are done by the book and there's no sort of room for error. So the fire safety testing and the carbon monoxide tests, these logbooks should all be accessible to the tenants ideally, and a copy for yourself, like I've already said, and including something about what to do in case of a fire. So it seems like common sense, but for anyone who's living in a new property, things might all be a bit different, confusing for them. They might be in a new area. So just including things like emergency phone numbers and advice is really helpful for the tenants, and it's useful for them to have in the pack. You also can include the electrical testing certificates. Like I said previously, these should last for up to 5 years. Make a record of anything that's going to need renewing or checking take the packs back off the tenants regularly, make sure everything's up to date so that nothing's lapsed, because you really don't want to find that you've not tested your appliances for 6 years and things are out of date. You can include your property redress scheme certificate if relevant, so this can all go into the folder. Include your PAT certificate, so that's the portable appliances testing certificate, so including this in the folder as well. It's really helpful if everything's just in one place for you and the tenant. And something which we would always recommend is that you include some sort of security policy or security notice for your tenants. Now, if things like locking the door, keep your windows shut, don't let burglars in the house, that all seems really common sense, but it's not necessarily something which everyone will do. And also it's helpful from your point of view if you've had this in writing to the tenants. So having some kind of security policy which all the tenants are aware of, anyone moving in is sort of advised to read through it and agree to, just for the safety of everybody living there together. You also need a Legionella testing certificate. So this is to do with Legionnaire's disease and a build-up in the water line. So regularly testing your water lines. You can have someone externally come and do this for you, but it all needs to be logged and recorded and kept up to date. It's also worth having a statement which just advises kind of the rules for the house, so things like not smoking, maybe no house parties at certain times and respecting your neighbours, that kind of thing. Also details of emergency services. Again, I know we've discussed fire, but things like the police, antisocial behaviour reporting, that's all helpful to have. And then another thing that's really useful for the tenants to have in one place is your maintenance policy. So any contact details, so things like waterworks, gas, broken appliances, if you put what is counted as an emergency and who to contact in what scenario, it'll mean that your tenants aren't constantly calling you with problems. So having that down in writing and an allocated person for each sort of scenario will be really beneficial for you and for your tenants so they can get things sorted out appropriately. Waste management. So a waste management policy, again, seems like common sense, but you need to tell your tenants when the bin day is, what they can recycle, where to take the bin. Because if they think that they leave the bin on the alleyway down the side of the house or up on the street, they might be wrong, and you don't want to have any problems with refuge collection. So you also don't want other neighbours complaining about waste. So it's really important to have a waste policy so your tenants know what they need to be doing. And then it's always worth including information for your tenants, such as the address of the property, where the gas meter, electric meter, stop tap, all that kind of thing. So if there's any problems, you can say to them, look in the pack, that's where your stop tap is, or they can look themselves. So giving them all the information they would need for you to have a peaceful tenancy. So they're not having to ring you all the time, you're not having to go to the property all the time. So all these things can be included in sort of a welcome pack for your tenants and in their documents. So the tenants need to be left the appliance instruction booklet. So again, another thing which might seem common sense, but is really easy to forget to include this kind of thing. So things like the toaster, microwave, kettle, all of the instruction books need to be in one place all together with any kind of guarantees, warranties, that kind of thing. Just so if anyone has any queries or concerns, they can easily find out how to use the product, and it will take another weight off your shoulders if you're not being called all the time asking how to use a microwave which wasn't switched on. So I hope you found this video useful. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of HMOs, what they are, and the main advice for using them for your property. Again, it's really important to consider all of these things before embarking on investing in an HMO property or converting one. Make sure that the figures add up if you're having to remove walls, change the positions of walls to make the bedrooms fit, that kind of thing. Is it going to stack up? Are your build costs going to make sense when you've actually got tenants in there? Speak to local estate agents. What's the going rate for a room? How quick can you fill them up? And making sure again that it's going to balance out. If you're already in a really great position with a rental property, it might not necessarily be the sensible thing to do at this time to convert it. So get some advice, keep researching it, learn as much as you can before taking that next step. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment, get in touch with us. You can check out the website, it's rossingtonhomes.com, and we'll be more than happy to help you where we can.